My name is Kevin Foster. I know quite a few of you, but for those of you who've not met me before, that's who I am. I'm the chairman of the Western Australian chapter of ASIS International. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm honoured to welcome all participants to the webinar about dreaming big and believing, to be presented by our esteemed guest speaker, Jo Stewart-Rattray. We have ASIS members joining us today from throughout Australia and from the Philippines. Welcome to all. I'm currently on land in Perth, Western Australia, that has been inhabited by the Whadjuk Noongar people for more than 40,000 years. As is the custom here, on behalf of the Western Australian chapter, I acknowledge the traditional owners of country in the Perth area and throughout Australia, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders both past and present. I would now like to ask Nicola Lockhart, a member of our chapter committee and champion of our Women and Security initiatives, to introduce our guest speaker for this webinar event. Thanks, Jo, and thanks, Nicola.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As Kevin says, my name is Nicola. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Women and Security Champion for the Western Australian chapter. I am really pleased today to be able to introduce Jo for a second time. As Women and Security Coordinator, I think one of the questions that gets asked a lot of women in security is how to actually go about increasing women in the industry. We're also helping with profiles and things like that. And I think probably the best answer that I can give is to spotlight these women and the fantastic things that we're doing and that we're achieving. And when I met Jo, I think we hit it off very, very quickly and have a very shared passion that spotlighting women in security is a really, really good way going forward. So I'm really pleased to be able to do this. As we say, this is the second webinar that we've done with the WA chapter. So the first one is available as a YouTube link, and fingers crossed, if Jo will come back, we will have her for a third webinar, again on the women in security, the spotlighting, the story side of things. This webinar in particular, as you will have seen from the literature, is a bit of a different type of webinar in that, Jo, it's very much a story, isn't it? And I think what is important here, and I think that the sort of the headline is, if they see it, they can be it, is a really important thing. This spotlighting, this idea of spotlighting and showing other women and other men and, you know, diverse genders that if we can see it, we can be it. So without droning on too much, I would like to hand over to Jo. If I could ask everybody to turn off their mics during the talk and hold questions to the end. So if there are any questions, they're reserved to the end of the talk. And hand over to you, Jo.
Thank you very much, Nicola. It's a great pleasure to be here. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I am speaking to you from today. And I'm on the Ngadjuri lands, the lands of the Ngadjuri people in the beautiful Clare Valley in South Australia. So I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to country. I also would like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be with us today. Without any further ado, I'm going to share a screen with you. So bear with me while I do this. It always takes longer than I think it's going to be. But this is a story. This is absolutely right. It's a story about a little kid from the Australian bush. Now, apparently I'm sharing. I'm just going to change this up so it should just be, oopsie, I told you it was going to take longer than I thought. I'm just looking to see what you're seeing. Hopefully you can see my screen, correct? I can see Kevin nodding. Thank you very much, Kevin, for that. This is the story of a little kid from the bush who dreamed big and believed. I am the volunteer founder of a global initiative called She Leads Tech. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of information about She Leads Tech to begin with. I was sitting in a boardroom in Brussels, Belgium in 2015 when I was member of a board of directors, and I was asked whether I would like a new portfolio. And I said, sure, thinking it was going to be something about cybersecurity because that's what I do. And they said, right, Jo. The then Chief Knowledge Officer of the organisation said, Jo, your new portfolio for this year is the Women's Initiative. That was it. No further information. The Women's Initiative. This organisation had never had a Women's Initiative, and all of a sudden it had been given to me for me to lead the Women's Initiative. So I had absolutely no idea what that was going to look like until I started to work with some other women and began to hear the stories of other women. And it has been an amazing experience, and it's led me to places that I didn't think I would ever go to. And having said that, this is the journey that it took me to get to this particular place. That's just a little bit of information about me, and that's COVID me. Used to be once upon a time I had beautiful straight hair and all the rest of it, and I got to the point where it was too hard. So I don't do that anymore. That's COVID me. I didn't know whether there was going to be any introduction about me, so I thought I'd give you a little bit of information. So in my day job, I'm Director of Technology and Security Assurance for BRM Advisory in Adelaide. I head that practice, but I've currently seconded myself out as Chief Security Officer to Silver Chain Group, who, as you know, also has a very large presence in Western Australia. So I always think the very best way to start any story is to say once upon a time. And once upon a time, a long time ago, I was born into a blue-collar family in the Australian bush. And yes, I know you can't tell, but that's me. I think I was 2 when that photo was taken. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting. I was the first, I'm an only child as well. And I literally lived in the heartland of Australia. I lived in a little place that's not on the map. It's a little place called Terang, and this is Terang. The pictures is of Terang, and it's a one-horse town. It had a general store and post office combined, a school, a church, and a hall, and that was it. Nothing more. If you wanted to go and buy anything bigger than milk, you had to go to Warrnambool, which was 80 kilometres away. So it was, you know, pretty amazing place to grow up though. And I do have to tell you that there was a particular redheaded kid who used to love going into the little village and used to love helping.
Jo, sorry, apologies to interrupt. We actually can't see the slides.
Oh, really?
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Let me stop sharing and start sharing again, see if that works.
Yeah, the slides weren't changing.
Oh, weren't they? Now it's stuck on my screen. I love technology when it works. Let's see if you can see it now.
Ah, perfect.
Can you see it?
Yes,
excellent.
In the heartland. I
did nothing, and there you go. All right, perfect. Okay, so there it is in the heartland. So, so this was the place, and you know, I used to help the amazing, very elderly postmistress round up her geese, and I found that I was a great goose herd. But I'm not going to tell you who might have actually helped let the geese out in the first place. You know, I will remind you, I've always been a redhead. So, you know, this was a long way from where I ended up, a huge journey from New York City, which is where this story will find itself at some point. But by the same token, I had a dream as a small kid. Now my slides won't change. Yes, they will. I had a small dream. The little kid on the left-hand side of the screen is me with a very bad haircut and a wobbly front tooth. My mother was terrified of nits at school, so I had my hair chopped off. And when I was that age, I had a dream. I dreamed of wanting to get out of the heartland and to help other people. And why did I want to do that? Because I'd seen Audrey Hepburn, who was in the middle there, in a movie, because I used to watch old movies with my dad and I loved them. And so I watched a movie with her where she was working at the United Nations and she was making a difference for people. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to help people. I want to work at the United Nations. Now, I'm not sure if you know who that little girl on the right-hand side of the screen is. That little girl is Audrey when she was 7. She had a good haircut and no wobbly tooth, I noticed. But I wonder what she thought at 7. Did she have any clue that she was going to become not only an amazing actor and movie star, but a goodwill ambassador for the UN? I wonder. But that movie stuck in my mind, and that dream was I wanted to do that. And I kept that dream. And I said, one day I'm going to make a difference for other people. And then I began to meet other women who were incredible. And particularly when I began my journey with She Leads Tech. I'm going to fast forward a lot of years. I'm not going to take you through all the stuff that happened as a kid in the bush because you'll be bored witless. So I began this journey with She Leads Tech in 2015 and really met some amazing women. And I've always believed that women make very strong connections. And often when we make a connection, we make that connection for life. There are people on that screen that I have known for a very long time and will continue to be great friends. And there are colleagues there as well. But I want to tell you about how this journey really got underway. If I hadn't been a member of this organisation, if I hadn't been hosting a She Leads Tech event in Canberra, I would never have had the opportunity to take the program where I took it to and to realise my dream. At the end of the lunch, after talking about the issues that women face in the workplace, particularly in the technology or security spaces, and I said, I'd really like for the program that I'm involved with to become involved with like-minded global organisations, like perhaps UN Women. And what about also, I would love to have a conversation with the Australian Ambassador for Women and Girls, because I think there's so much that we could be doing and so much more that we could be doing to get traction for women and to make girls aware of what's possible for them in their journey. And as I was saying goodbye to this group of women, an amazing woman came up to me who was quite high in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in security. And she said to me, Jo, I know that you're racing for an aircraft, but I want to send you a link to an opportunity that I'm going to get you to promise me that you will absolutely put your hat in the ring for. Sure, I said, not a problem. Of course I will. So I didn't think anything more about it. I did. I raced off to catch a plane and I got back to Adelaide and it was quite late. And, I'm standing there. I am one of those people who stand up quite quickly on an aircraft before the doors are open, just because I've got to stand up. I've got a lot of energy and I don't like sitting around for too long. So I was standing up and I just turned my phone on and I thought, and there were a couple of dings. So I thought I'd have a look. And sure enough, Sandra had sent me a link. And I looked at that link and it was a link to an opportunity to put a submission in to become perhaps one of only 2 civil society representatives to join the official Australian delegation to the 62nd session of the Commission on the Status of Women at UN headquarters in New York City. I looked at it and was at first astounded that she'd sent it to me. Then I looked at it again and said, yes, I can do this. This is the journey for my dream. I'm going to get there. And then I did all the things that I tell women that I mentor not to do. I said, I can't do that. I can't do it. And I actually have a funny feeling I might have been saying it out loud, because the man standing behind me on the aircraft was giving me a very strange look. But I was having this tussle with myself. I can't do it. I can do it. I can't do it. I can do it. And I went, oh, geez. So I got home and I sent an email to my colleagues in the US. And I said, okay, there's this opportunity and it will take me and our program to what I consider to be the highest level of advocacy for women across the globe. And I explained the opportunity and sent them the details. And I just asked, do you think I should do this? Now, bearing in mind they're American, the response was, hell yeah. So I backed myself into a corner. I actually had to do this. So I had to put in a submission. It was some nutty thing like 4.5 pages only. I don't know why 4.5, but it was 4.5 pages. That was on Thursday night, and I had to have it in by, I think it was midday on Sunday. So I wrote something up, I'd send it to my colleagues, they'd critique it and send it back, and I'd do all of that. And this kept going on until 10 o'clock on Sunday morning when I was finally happy with it. And I pressed send and felt sick. Great Australian tradition. I thought, well, I've had a crack. I've had a crack. I'm okay. I've had a crack at this. And didn't think anything more about it. Went about my business, went presenting on all kinds of issues around women insecurity and stuff. And I just happened to be presenting in Melbourne. And on stage, when we could still do virtuals, when we still do real, not virtual presentations. And my jacket pocket kept buzzing. And I thought, I wonder who wants me, because they're pretty insistent. Anyway, I ring this number back and a woman said, oh, hi, Joe, it's Rachel. I'm from the Office for Women, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Just wondering when you can make yourself available for us to interview you for the potential of coming to New York with us. Well, can you imagine what I said? I said, oh, just a minute, Rachel, let me check my diary. Check my diary? Seriously? I couldn't believe that had come out of my mouth, because of course I was going to move hell and high water to make sure I could speak to these people when they needed to speak to me. So I spoke to them. I was interviewed, and you know, you can tell I like to have a bit of a chat and chat with marbles in my mouth underwater. And I was asked, the very last question was, and what's your role in civil society? Now, being a bit of a smarty pants, I just couldn't help myself. I said, I live in it. I went, oh no, that's not the right answer. So I quickly backpedaled and talked about She Leads Tech, and I talked about my work with, you know, looking to get greater traction for women to leadership across the tech sector and security in particular. So, you know, I suddenly thought, oh, I think I might have actually managed that. I think I've actually backpedaled and I'll be all right. But I still had that little chat with myself about, well, I've had a crack, I've done it. If that's the end of it, I at least gave it a go. About another week went by, and one of my board mentor, who's been my mentor for 10 years, an amazing guy, was at that time was Deputy Director General of the Department of Communities, Queensland, so a pretty good title. He was one of my referees, and he rang me and said, hey, Joe, you started packing your bags yet? And I said, what are you talking about, Tony? And he said, well, I think you're going to be going to New York, because I told them that if they didn't take you, they were mad. So the moral of this story is, make sure at least one of your referees prepared to lie for you, because seriously, that's what he must have done. Anyway, I finally get a phone call about a week later. Everything takes so long. A week later, and I was told that that I was going to New York. Now, we don't cry in security. I know you all know that. We don't cry in security, but I'll tell you what, there was a lump rose in my throat, because that little kid from the bush was going to get her way and was going to go to New York City to UN. What a great thing. How fantastic. Office for Women rang me back and said, there's one catch, Joe. There's a little bit of a shuffle going to go on in the minister's office. So you can't say anything. You're under embargo until such time as the changes have been made. Well, there wasn't just a change in the minister's office. There were 2 ministerial reshuffles in the next 3.5 months. Yes, we were under embargo for 3.5 months. How extraordinary. And it was literally the day before we had to announce that they actually announced that we were going to New York. And the photo in the bottom of the screen is then Minister for Women, Kelly O'Dwyer, my other civil society rep, Pat, and myself. We were actually at the Australian Consulate General in New York City when that was taken. So we actually got there, but not without 3.5 months of embargo. And I've got to tell you, the other thing is you find that if you can't tell anybody something for 3.5 months, you actually find yourself in a complete bind, because you've got to tell the boss, you've got to tell your partner. There are people that you actually have to tell about this sort of stuff, right? So you've got to make sure that they're prepared to keep storm. And that's the hardest thing ever. I mean, my husband was so proud. He said to me, he's a professional musician. I'm going to rehearsal tonight. Can I tell the band? I'm like, no, you can't tell anybody. So this is the moral of this story is, again, so you've got to have referees prepared to lie for you, and also got to have people who really know how to keep a button on it. But I go back to the point that without having made the connections that I have made, this opportunity would never have come my way. And there are women in these photographs that mean a lot to me that helped me on that journey. So I'm very grateful. So I went to New York City. And the very first thing I had to do in New York was go to the ambassador, Australia's permanent mission has a UN ambassador. And so I had to go to Ambassador Byrd's residence with the rest of the delegation for her to meet with us, because we were going to be working with her. The theme for the session of the commission was empowering rural women and girls through the use of technology. So you can see that was really in my sweet spot. And so I became a technical advisor to the delegation. And what you do in those sessions is you are, over a 2.5-week period, you negotiate a roadmap for the next 6 years for all of the 193 member states to follow when it comes to anything to do with empowering rural women and girls in the use of technology. So this is a really big ask. The roadmap does not exist if all 193 member states have not agreed to every single clause. I now have the greatest respect for diplomats. I never ever thought that I would be in the situation to be in the negotiating room and assist them. But the very first job I had to do was go to Ambassador Byrd's residence with the rest of the delegation. And you can see the table is set there for afternoon tea. And every single one of those cups has the coat of arms of Australia and gold leaf on them. And it made you suddenly realise where you were. That for me, I felt like I'd arrived. I was sitting across the table from June Oscar, who is the Social Justice Commissioner for Indigenous people, and an amazing woman. She spoke. What I didn't realise was we were all going to have to introduce ourselves and talk about how we got to be there. And June spoke first, and she was terrific. And she said to me, "Oh, Joe, I believe it's your turn." So I told a shortened version of the kid from the bush who wanted to go to the UN. And I was so nervous, I could barely get the words out. These were really high-powered women. There was also the Ambassador for Women and Girls, there was the Minister, there was Ambassador Byrd, there was 3 commissioners from the Human Rights Commission, and some very high-powered women from Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And again, you know, I did what I tell women not to do. I got so nervous I could barely speak. And I just had to remember these women are just like me. They have to get out of bed in the morning and they have to, you know, put their shoes on and put their makeup on and do all of the stuff that I do. So I told my story, but had I not had June across the table from me, just smiling and nodding and really being engaged with what I was saying, I'm not sure I would have been able to get through it. So that was the first experience that I had. And then every morning we would have a get together and determine what had to happen for the day. So it would be what each of the commissioners was going to do, what the civil society reps were doing. And it was all very almost military precision to get us to the UN and to determine where we were going and what we were doing. So on the very first morning we met and got together, walking from our hotel to the UN. It was cold and it was, I didn't feel it. I was as warm as toast because I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, you know, I dreamed about this all of my life and now it's going to happen. I was terrified I was going to get run over by a bus on the way there. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. So we got there. And I have to say that it was really quite amazing. Where I'm standing on the left-hand side there, that is the coldest place in the entirety of the world, I feel sure. It had not, that was the first time I felt cold. It hadn't snowed in New York for nearly 3 weeks and there were blocks of ice on the ground there still. The wind just whips off the East River. It was really cold. So we were going onto the floor of the General Assembly to sit at the Australia desk with the minister for the opening session of the commission. And that is an enormous room and it is just so overwhelming. You walk down a corridor of flags and you walk in and, you know, I was just amazed when Rachel, the international engagement director, who's a tough nut, ex-military, turned to me and said, I know you don't cry in security, but if you don't cry when you walk in here, you're tougher than I am, because I cried the first time I came onto the floor of the GA and I went, yeah, sure, I'll be fine. We don't cry in security. Well, yeah, you know what? I cried. Standing there, it was just the most amazing experience to sit at the Australia desk and listen to the Secretary General, who I'm a great fan of, address us and say that he is a committed feminist. I was stunned. Antonio Guterres, the committed feminist, ex-Prime Minister of Portugal, and he said, as women, we need to take back the power. Otherwise, we will be living in a male-dominated world forever. And you've heard me say before, some of you, that he's not prepared for his granddaughters to have to wait for equality across the world. It was a really powerful experience to hear him speak and to say those things. So that was the beginning, the opening session. This was the beginning of 2.5 weeks of incredibly hard work and 2.5 weeks of occasionally me getting to sit at the Australian desk by myself, because as a delegation, we made the decision that out of respect for the Commission and for our women at home who were relying on us to come out with a position, that we would never leave the desk unstaffed. So at 11 o'clock on the very first morning, I got to sit there by myself and I was hoping like heck I wasn't going to be asked a question, because sometimes you're asked questions and you have to answer for it on behalf of your country. I was going to have to do the Great American thing from all the courtroom dramas and say, I take that under advisement, but you'll be glad to know I didn't have to do that. So we moved from the General Assembly into the working room. And the interesting thing about Conference Room 4 at the UN, it's a huge room. It holds probably 850 people. And there's usually about 450 people in the room anytime. And what happens is you see countries beginning to break into voting blocks. Australia is very interesting. We sit in a number of different voting blocks. We sit in the Pacific Forum. We sit in, because obviously that's where we are. We also sit with CANS, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Mountains, this group called Mountains, which are all the non-EU European countries. And for some reason, we're part of Mountains as well. So we went into that room, and our chief diplomat, our chief negotiator, who on the second photo in from the right-hand side, that's the back of her head sitting at the Australia desk. Penny was an amazing woman, an amazing negotiator, determined that we should sit in the middle of this great big semicircle with all of our allies. A powerful statement that I think we can all take something from as well. You know, this is the way that you show your strength, if you like. And for anybody who knows me knows that I've travelled for a long time, and I always have a little travelling companion, and that's Gus, the travelling bear. He was taking a few notes on the first session, and he was listening to the simultaneous translation, if you can believe that. So some of the things that I learnt that were quite amazing was this breakup of groups. So you will actually stop active negotiation on whatever the point might be on what's a huge document, 90 pages or something. And you'll break up into multilateral and bilateral discussion because there's a sticking point. Somewhere there's a sticking point. And so this can happen long into the night. And this photo that you can see is about 3 o'clock in the morning. And if you have a look, Switzerland is lying down on the left-hand side, having a great big snooze. The lady under the white trench coat is from DFAT. Yes, she's an Australian diplomat. You've got Ghana, who's on the nod. She's having a little sleep. You've got a couple of the African ladies having a bit of a chat. Norway's up the back wide awake, and Ghana's definitely having a sleep. So this is what happens. You can't go anywhere. You actually have to wait until those bilaterals and multilaterals are over. And what caused this? Out of nowhere, a particular diplomat stood up and said, "This is a position that we redline." And when you have a red line, it means that you can go no further. That means that negotiation has to stop. So that means you're not going to get agreed conclusions. So you have to do everything that you possibly can to ensure that you move forward. And this was actually talking about women journalists in the field and women human rights defenders assisting in field work. And this particular country said, "We've redlined it. We don't want to talk about it. End of story." And the most powerful thing for me was when one of the male diplomats from Brazil stood up and said, "I think there needs to be some multilateral discussions about this, because I've just had word that one of our civil rights defenders in the field, human rights defenders, Mary Ellen Franco, has lost her life. She has been beaten to death because of the work that she's doing in the field for women in the favelas." The room went absolutely ice cold and quiet. And it was at that point where everybody realised that there needed to be a discussion. You can't let this go for another 6 years when you're hearing those sort of powerful stories. So they took, in fact, there were 4 countries took the country who redlined out. And I looked at one of our diplomats and I said, "They're going to go out and beat him up because they look really angry." She said, "We're diplomats. We don't punch people out, but they are going to have a very serious discussion with him." So that was the kind of work that we were doing, trying to drive forward the agenda for women's equality, particularly when it comes to the use of technology across the world. Some of the things that we had to do was we even had to establish, what does infrastructure look like? What does infrastructure mean? Because you have to establish the language in the first place, because it doesn't mean the same thing in every part of the world. Think of a family. What's a family? A family in Australia is very different to what a family could look like somewhere else. You know, it's not necessarily two people and a child or two people and children. So, you know, you have to do that without denigrating the meaning of that, whatever the term is, for everybody in the room. So this is fairly, you know, high tension, if you like. And the kid from the bush is there witnessing all of this. And long into the night, things start to get a bit nutty. And I have to say, I liked taking the night shift for that reason. Just excuse me, I have to shut my den door. So I used to like taking the night shift because that's when the diplomats do all get a bit crazy. So one of the guys from Iceland said to me, do you have your gentleman bear with you tonight, John? I said, yes, I do. I think it's time he addressed the assembly. So really serious stuff going on, but he poses Gus in all these positions and takes photographs. I mean, I got to tell you, it was a little bit surreal. We walked back to the hotel, the lady in the white trench coat and I, after 2.5 weeks of negotiation, shocked by the red line incident, and said, well, I don't think we're going to get any agreed conclusions. What do you think? And I said, no, I don't think so. And so I think it was 6 o'clock in the morning when we got back to the hotel, and we had to be back at UNHQ at 10 o'clock the following morning. So we walked back to work the next morning, and the same thing. We were both quite convinced we would not get a roadmap. And the last time this particular theme was on, same thing, no agreed conclusion. No one could agree on all of the things that affect women and girls across the world. Some of those things that we had to deal with were about education, girls who start to drop behind their male peers at school because for 1 week a month, there is no sanitation. They live in period poverty. There's no access to sanitation products or sanitary products for them. So, you know, of course, the use of technology, if it's rolled out and it's affordable or free to the citizenry, those girls have an opportunity that they wouldn't have otherwise. So we were fighting like heck to make sure that that was going to happen. And it was amazing because come 10 o'clock that final morning, a whole lot of these very tough situations were beginning to be agreed, but we still had the situation of the red line. What were they going to do about the red line? Because we know that women human rights defenders and women peacekeepers do make a difference when it comes to conflicts of war or conflicts. And they actually, not only do they get a peace, but they actually get lasting peace. So we couldn't let the red line go. So I was surprised to see how some of the voting blocks had begun to break up. There's Africa Group, for instance. All of a sudden there were countries within Africa Group were beginning to make interventions, which is a statement on the floor. And they're beginning to make interventions about particular areas because clearly they had an agenda that was not that of the bloc. Australia kept its line with the rest of its bloc, and there was no issue. But we still had the red line. What's going to happen about this red line? Well, the interesting thing about the red line was all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this particular diplomat stood up and said, I have spoken to Capital. And when you speak to Capital, it means you've spoken to home base and you've probably spoken to the Prime Minister or the Minister for Women or the equivalent in your country. So this person said, I have spoken to Capital and I withdraw the red line. the room went absolutely silent. Because in a room that big, where there are negotiations going on, it's never completely silent, but it went completely silent, and you could hear a pin drop. So everybody was a little bit surprised, because this particular country, when it calls a red line, it usually holds its red line. It was discovered that that particular person had in fact gone alone and had not actually spoken to Capital, but made that decision unilateral by himself. Apparently that diplomat was, from the end of that session, had not been seen at the UN again. He's probably serving detention back in his home country. Pretty dramatic, but that's how it is. You're actually fighting for people's rights, their human rights. And women's rights are human rights. And when we got to the end and the final gavel, and it was that red line, that final gavel fell, and all conclusions had been agreed. I thought, after the stress I'd been through in the last 2.5 weeks, I would just be absolutely relieved. But there was this incredible sense of joy in the room. It just broke out into cheers. You can see people, you can see two guys up on the stage there kissing one another. It really was like that. It was amazing, absolutely beautiful, very tall black woman. I think she was from one of the African nations, grabbed me so hard, lifted me off the floor and gave me a kiss on both cheeks. And I still don't know her name. But that was the joy that we felt, that we actually had agreed conclusions. We've gotten to the point of, making a difference. I actually realised that the kid from the bush had come and done this amazing thing. Thank you to all of those other women who pushed me and supported me and helped me along the journey to make a difference for other women and girls. So what happens then? What do you do after that? Well, you could sit on an aircraft going home and feel really elated but let down. But I didn't. I decided I needed to do things for other people too. So I went home, and the first thing I did was have a glass of champagne to celebrate with my, I don't have much family, so it was with my family of friends. I then went about rolling out the She Leads Tech program in 16 countries with my colleagues, both in orange in the first photo on the left-hand side there. And so, yes, that program is now in 180 countries around the world, which is stunning. So I also then got a phone call from a friend of mine who said, my daughter would really like to meet Gus the travelling bear. And I went, sure, okay, let's meet and have a hot chocolate together. So we went and met, but what she actually wanted was not to meet Gus the travelling bear, but to ask me if I would be her sponsor for a particular youth technology competition, which happened to be Australia-wide. And if you won the nationals, you could find yourself going to the international competition. So of course I said yes, because it dawned on me in that moment, what I wanted to do was not just help the women who are already in the workforce, but it's to also help those young women and girls to see that it's okay to be in security. Because Caitlin's project that she wanted to take to the competition was all about cybersecurity for kids. And it was really well thought out. And so I decided that I had to help those generations coming up behind me as well. And so I realised that I needed to help, as I say, women and girls around the world using the She Leads Tech program to ensure that women have a safe place to tell their stories. And I've heard some amazing stories in certain parts of the world where we ended up by working together to develop a communities where women could feel that they were safe and could tell their stories and could share experiences and could in fact lift one another up. And so I learnt that I was given, a friend gave me a poster that has this phrase on it, Alice proprius volat, she flies with her own wings. And I guess that's what I've been doing, except there are a couple of things. I couldn't do it by myself, and I did have to get Qantas and American Airlines to help me, and a whole range of other airlines as well. And my wings have been clipped, but I'm actually doing more of this work now globally than I was because of travel being impossible almost. You couldn't be in so many destinations at once. My husband laughs that, you know, I think I've actually been on 3 continents in one night, because I find the work is so important that I will put myself out to ensure that I can help women and girls to realise their dreams, because I know that we each have it in ourselves that we can. But what we have to do is we do need to dream big, and we do need to believe. We need to believe in ourselves. One of the other things, the only way that I believe you do that, as does Ashley Barty, be true to yourself and chase your dreams. And that's what I've done. And that's what my call to action to all of you is to go out and chase your dreams. Because if you have a dream, it might take all of your life to actually realise it, but believe in yourself and it will happen. And this is a story not just for women. This is a story for men and women, because it's only together as allies, standing shoulder to shoulder, do we make a difference. Dream big and believe, and you too could find yourself in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you very much. That was quite a story. I knew obviously you had a very, very diverse and interesting background, but the very fact that you went to the UN and you did so much there. Tyson actually asked a question, and
yes.
He says, how is the continued, obviously you did an awful lot of things, and I can't believe the pictures of the people falling asleep in the UN. I thought that was brilliant. But anyway, Tyson wanted to know, how is the continued support from the UN and the participating countries felt today as a direct result of the things that you did?
Really good question, Tyson. Each country is held to account. So in that 6-year period until it comes up again, that theme comes up again each year. Each country has to go back and make a country statement. So you make a country statement against what you have done. So what happened in New York at the 62nd session is now still having an effect in the world today. One of the things that has happened in Australia is we still have 16,000 telephone boxes in this country. You go, yes, so what? Well, they actually represent a safe refuge for women who are fleeing family or domestic violence. And so they can barricade themselves into a phone box with a light over their head and of course a phone, so they can actually call for help, and they can stay in there until help comes. Those phone boxes were going to be removed, but part of our drive in RRR Australia, which is rural, regional and remote Australia, was to ensure that phone boxes remained. And so that was core to some of the work that we had done at the UN. So, you know, it's a global reach, if you like, but it's a local push to ensure that we do the right things as a result.
Wow, something so visceral, so, you know, we can actually all envision that. Gosh, obviously we're all, I think this is sort of from myself listening to you, and obviously being involved in the women in security movement, as it were. Obviously you've been talking about some really, really traumatic things that you are dealing with and trying to help, and the things that you did and put in place. I mean, some fantastic, gosh, things I just can't even imagine being involved in. Fantastic. But from a point of view of being a woman in the security industry, having little children, little girls myself, being a university tutor of women who are actively trying to get into the security industry, what one takeaway perhaps would you say that we could all, go away and do better or aim for or strive for in terms of increasing the profile of women in the security industry in general? I mean, obviously all the serious things that you're talking about, but what can we do in our professional lives, do you think?
Don't take no for an answer for a start. I guess the other thing too is, if you don't ask, you won't get. So if you really want someone to work with you, to be your ally, to be your mentor, to be your champion, ask them. So that's the first thing. If you don't ask, you don't get. So I think we can do something about that. We can help to mentor other women, or indeed young women who are just coming into the professions that ACIS serves. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think that we can do is, you're right, showcase women. We need to showcase the stories, because, it always feels better if you go into a situation where you see people that look like you. So given that situation, we need to showcase the women who are succeeding now, no matter where they are on their career trajectory, whether they're at the very beginning and just starting their climb, or whether they're a bit of an old warhorse like me and been around for a while. So I think we should be showcasing women to say it's all right, it's okay to be in this business, because it actually offers you a lot. So I think that's the other thing, is to showcase the achievements of women, and also change up the language as well. Just change up the language in your own sphere of influence to be encouraging to women.
Interesting. Dave Brooks, you have a hand up. Are you hoping to ask a question?
Yes, please. Thanks, Nicola. Jo, very, very interesting. I love your story. Thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
That was good. I'm from Edith Cowan University, but I also sit on the ASIS Foundation as a trustee. Now, we've just set up a 5-year strategy for our research direction within the foundation, which obviously feeds into the ASIS. And one of those themes is diversity, equity, and inclusion in security.
Yes.
And I think in many ways you sort of answered the question I'm going to pose, that given an opportunity to sort of explore research and gain evidence to improve the situation, what area of focus would you take?
David, that's a really good question. And let me say this much to you, that there's been a lot of research done, a lot of research about, I think of it as idea. So it's inclusion, it's diversity, it's equality, and it's action, right? So there's been a lot of research done, but there's not a lot of action that's taken place. So I think we have to do whatever it takes to get to the action, to make a difference. This is a 100-plus-year-old story that we're talking about, a lack of equality for women, regardless of the industry sector that we're talking about. So I think it's about, let's move from purple, green, and white suffragette colours, and let's see women leading the charge in security. If research will help, that's fantastic. But why don't we take the research we currently have and turn that research into actual action?
That's great. Thanks, Jo. Spot on. Thank you.
So sorry, I actually ended up by asking you a question.
No. It's actually because our focus at the foundation is to give practitioners evidence and guidance, not just to produce abstract research. So you've really sort of refocused, that's our focus anyway. So I think you've refocused the question we need to ask. In other words, gather the research and then turn that into a practitioner's guide to change the language and case studies in those sort of areas. Thank you.
Oh, case studies are really powerful. Interestingly, I'm a donor of the ASIS Foundation, only a little one, but I proudly have the donor badge on my LinkedIn.
Again, much appreciated. Thank you, Jo.
Oh, has anybody else got any other questions that they'd like to pose before we let Joe leave us? No? All right, Joe, thank you so much. What an interesting story. Some really very, very, gosh, yeah, very interesting, very surprising as well. So lots to think about. Now I guess I shall hand over to Kevin just to say thank you and mop up for us, Kevin.
You're on mute, Kevin.
You're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Thanks, Nicola. Oh, look, a very special thank you to you, Joe, for sharing your amazing story with us. It was very interesting to hear about your journey from a girl in the bush to the UN, your insights about UN processes and your experience there, and you know, the experiences about those discussions and debates on really important issues of women's rights, equality, and opportunities as well, and how the whole process and experience inspired you to continue the journey. It's great that you're also inspiring others to join that journey. So I think it's been a terrific presentation, and I'm sure everybody has enjoyed it. And so I'd really like everybody to just join me in expressing your appreciation. Thank you very much, Joe. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Kevin. Always a pleasure.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's all, everybody. So we'll conclude the session now. Thank you very much for coming along. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
That was fascinating, Kevin.
Yeah, it was very good.
Yeah. I will catch you later. We need to catch up for coffee sometime.
Yeah, that'd be terrific. We should do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no problem. Well, see you later.
Yep. I'm just sort of playing around with my computer here, but I've got a strange thing on my screen, but I'll just move that out of the way. Okay.
Got in recording, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just try to finish. I better push the record button if I can find it. There it is. Okay.